Hi, everyone, and welcome to our graduate student roundtable. We are all graduate students from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill doing something with Jewish studies. And so in our careers here, we have worked with the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies a lot. And we thought we would come together and kind of talk about the advantages that the Carolina Center has had for us throughout our careers here at UNC, and kind of highlight the events that we thought were very beneficial for us. So let me introduce myself. My name is Tina Rasala. I am a 7th-year PhD student in the Department of Religious Studies. And I am an archaeologist. I'm a biblical archaeologist. So I try to go to Israel every summer for excavations. And then my work focuses on the material culture of ancient Judaism and a little bit of early Christianity within Palestine. And I am actually the first receiver or recipient of the TEP Fellowship provided by the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies. The TEP Fellowship is, and I have to look at my sheet here, the Tau Epsilon Phi Graduate Student Fellowship, which was established, I think, 7 years ago, since I was the first recipient, in order to fund scholars who are doing something with Jewish studies, but don't have the necessary funding from our own department at UNC to come to UNC for these studies. Mostly international students. So I'm originally from Belgium, and moving to the US was very expensive. And I was allowed in by the religious studies. I was accepted, except for I cost more money to the department because I will never be an in-state student. I will always be an out-of-state student, which means that my tuition is much higher than other people in my department. And so the Jewish Center was so kind to find the extra funding, the extra top up to fund my studies in my 1st and 5th year of my graduate studies. So I was able to come here to the US. So without the Carolina Center, I would not even be here. So very grateful for that. And so this year, my 7th year, I'm actually out of funding. And so I have a part-time job at the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies as their graduate student assistant. So now I work for them a couple of hours a week, get a little bit of extra money to fund my studies in my 7th year. And so I am super grateful for everything that they have provided to us. And I brought 3 other graduate students on board for this talk today, or this roundtable, who also have their own experience with the center and are eager to talk to you about it. So our first guest is maybe Leah. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Leah Greenberg, and I am a 6th and final year graduate student in the Carolina Duke Graduate Program in German Studies. And so that's a program between the University of North Carolina and Duke University. But I definitely would consider my second home to be the Center for Jewish Studies, where I've been both sort of growing up in my first couple of years before I became a doctoral candidate and finding my footing in Jewish studies. And then as I started my dissertation project, which is on the trope of the Jewish daughter in German Jewish and Yiddish literature from the Berlin Haskalah until the early 20th century with Sholem Aleichem. And I have to say that I'm very grateful for the center for funding my very first real experience learning Yiddish, and also my first trip to Israel. Not for an excavation, unfortunately, although that would have been also exciting. I'm definitely more in the modern period, but I had the support of the center so that I could study at the Naomi Prower Kadar Yiddish summer program at Tel Aviv University in the summer of after my first year of graduate school, so that was 2016. And then I also had support this last summer during our very remote, strange work time as we were all adjusting to what researching and working remotely was like. And yeah, I've always felt that I had a sort of a second home at the center in terms of another sort of cohort of graduate students to work with and to connect with from other disciplines. Always lunchtime seminars to attend, always evening talks to attend, always scholars from different fields to get to know, and from different institutions. And I also helped to organize one of the graduate student speaker series in, I believe, my second year.
Didn't we do that together,
When
Leah?
Naomi, we did, that's correct.
I remember that.
Graduate school takes so much time that it's very, and I have no sense of time in a pandemic. So that was, I think, 2017.
Yes, I think it was 2016, 2017. So each
Yeah.
year, the center asks us if we want to organize, us graduate students, one event where we invite a scholar that we think would be interesting for all graduate students and for UNC as a whole, because they also give a public lecture. To invite them and accommodate them and kind of give us some experience organizing events. But then of course, also having the opportunity to invite someone that we all enjoy and want to meet and want to have dinner with. And I think we invited somebody from the Jewish Museum in Switzerland, right?
Yes, in Basel, I believe. And she spoke on the history of the Jewish hat.
Yes.
So that had some medieval connections. We definitely show like the range chronologically of Jewish studies for sure. And so that's also part of choosing a speaker, is sort of speaking to the different chronological and geographic areas of Jewish studies, which are incredibly diverse. And so you can't appease everyone every year, but I think it's good then each year to have something that speaks to a different group.
Yeah, I especially like that she worked in a museum, because I thought, that would work for anybody who is interested in cultural heritage, or very useful to know. Yeah. Josh?
Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Shelley, and like Leah, I am also in the Carolina Duke German Studies program, and I am working on a dissertation on German Jewish utopias that were written by German Jews who were involved in the Zionist movement at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. And so obviously my work is very much situated in Jewish studies as well as in German studies. And there are so many ways in which the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies has really helped me as I've gone through my process of exploration in terms of coursework and identifying what my topic would be. And then once I identified my topic, in helping me to do research on that. So just a few examples that I can think of right off the bat are that in the first year, after my first year of study, I wanted to go to Israel to work on Hebrew, because obviously my project on German Zionism involves also people who either only spoke Hebrew or spoke Hebrew in addition to German. And so the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies offered me a travel grant to help subsidize that study, and was the first time I was ever in Israel. And then to kind of bookmark that, when I started my research on Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, I needed to go to Israel again in order to do some archival research in the Central Zionist Archives. And at that point, the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies also awarded me a second travel grant that allowed me to defray the cost of that trip, so that I could go and find several resources, including one text by a German-speaking Jew that was pretty early on chronologically in terms of early Zionist thought and early Zionist literature. And I was only able to get it in Israel. And so because of the support of the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies, I was able to go to Israel and look at that document, take some photos, and take those photos back with me so that I could give a full picture in my dissertation of the story that I'm trying to tell. Of course, the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies is also about more than just sponsoring any one of our individual research projects. They're also about bringing speakers to campus, and I've been really grateful for the variety, the great diversity of speakers in Jewish studies who've come anywhere from people who study Judeo-Arabic and are thinking about things in the 19th century, to people like Jody Magnus, who has given talks on her work in biblical archaeology, which is several thousand years ago. Team can probably talk much more about that than I can. And it has really been like a second home for me. And I'm really grateful for all the support that donors provide and the institutional support that UNC provides so that the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies can help students who are interested in questions that Jewish Studies is asking.
Right. And I was going to bring that up, saying that it is clear from all of our work that we are historians, as in we want to go out there and explore the material that exists in the world. And we cannot just do that staying at UNC, right? All our projects involve travel and going to meet people and meet places and conduct research abroad. And our own departments don't offer a lot of funding for these projects to be possible. And if they do offer a summer research grant, there's so much competition because your department is so big that you're competing with everybody else who does Islam, who does whatever, American studies. And the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies is really the only place that we can go to where we can say, look, this is important for the scholarship of Judaism. This is important for our field. And where we can get the funding to then go out and go do some research for our projects. And so I think this has been very beneficial for everybody on campus who wants to do something with Jewish studies, that we know there's a place like, oh, okay, we want to do this project. I don't know how I can fund it, but I know the center has our back and they will try their best to find a way to figure out how we can make it possible and how we can get the funding to do these projects. Justine?
Hey y'all, my name is Justine Orlovsky-Schnitzler. It's a long double-barreled last name. So if anyone's watching this and can see my Zoom name, that's why I abbreviated. It would not fit in the little name box. I'm a second-year student in the Folklore MA program, which is part of American Studies. And I am studying the Yiddish music of Jewish partisans as performed for a modern audience, specifically by the Yiddish chorus A Besser Welt, which means a better world. Any Yiddish speaker watching this hopefully is nodding along and not cringing at my pronunciation. And that's part of the Workers' Circle in Boston, which is a center for Jewish life and secular Jewish life. I was also the graduate intern last year for the center, so I was in the role that you're in now. So I got to work firsthand on, bringing scholars to Carolina to speak to our community, creating space for my peers to work on grant applications, practice job talks, et cetera, and have a hand in just even working social media and kind of mediating engagement between the center and our donors and our supporters. And with the grant that I received last summer, which as a folklore MA student, it's a 2-year program. So I have a shorter time frame than some of, obviously, a PhD student, fewer summers to obtain funding. I originally was planning to travel to Boston to do my interviews for my ethnographic research in person. And of course, COVID prevented that. And I was also planning to travel to Poland and work in the archives, the National Archives there, which houses the bulk of partisan material in the world, while taking a Yiddish language intensive, and goes without saying that didn't happen. But I did still receive travel funding that allowed me to research remotely and safely through the summer. And I did the virtual YIVO Yiddish language seminar. So taking that course actually means that I am, and I checked this, the first master's student who's going to graduate with the center's like Jewish Studies certificate. So that's very exciting. Yeah, I think that's a broad overview, and I wish I could speak more to having actually gotten to travel with money from the center, but regardless, my scholarship would not have been possible if I didn't receive living expenses. So I'm deeply grateful.
For some of us, it's just a top up. That's what I had in my first and fifth year, just moving here and having all these kind of expenses. Right. Was very grateful that was covered, because it's a big investment to uproot your life for only 2 years, like you right. did, if you don't have the financial backup. Especially
and YIVO costs money as well, right? The course costs money that you had to pay as well.
It does, and that the price was not significantly different. Understandably, this is also how they keep themselves afloat, especially in a time like this. But and they did a fantastic job. For the record, anyone who might come across this who's curious about Yiddish intensives online, they did a fantastic job. Yeah. So.
Right, great. I also wanted to touch upon the many events that the Carolina Center usually organizes in person if there's not a COVID. I remember many excellent lunch talks where the Carolina Center would actually provide lunch, which is always a great way to get graduate students to come to your events, get a free lunch. And then we always had a fascinating guest speaker who would talk about a certain topic, a book that they had just published or something else. Do you remember a couple of examples of people that you thought were very interesting to meet, or that something that you got out of that? Anyone can go.
I can jump in here. I think one of the most interesting speakers that I can think of is Guy Miron, who's in Israel. And he gave a talk both at a different event, but I remember a lunchtime seminar he gave where we spoke about a paper he did where he was looking at questions of spatiality. So how does literature create space? And that's something that really I found very interesting. It sounds a little esoteric, but in terms of what I'm working on and thinking about the ways in which Jewish novels created the space of Israel so that people could read it and imagine it before there ever was such a thing as Israel in the modern sense of Israel. And so Guy Miron coming, and that was partially supported by the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies, was someone who started me thinking about things like that, even though it was in a slightly different context. And that's something that I would credit partially with what has become the topic of my dissertation.
Wow. Yeah, I remember mostly Gideon Avni coming. He is an archaeologist working on mostly the later time periods in Israel, going into the Islamic period, 7th, 8th century. But he's also very much involved in the Israel Antiquities Authority, very high up in that organization. So when he came to UNC and we had the opportunity to have dinner with him, because they often allow us graduate students to go have dinner with this person, and so we can have a one-on-one conversation. I, of course, immediately jumped on to that opportunity. And now every now and then when I go to Israel in the summers, I actually see him or I meet him in Jerusalem. So that was a great networking opportunity to have a chance to sit down with a very accomplished archaeological scholar and introduce yourself and have a conversation, and then network and see him at conferences. And so that's another way into the archaeology sector that I would have never had without this dinner. So that was a great event.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, the fact that we get to connect with scholars from other institutions is so interesting and fun. And important for us, but I think also the sort of community we build by having like book launches for like Ruth von Bernhardt's book and Jonathan Hess's latest book were things that I also remember very fondly from the center. And so we did something like a similar lunch seminar and sort of all both celebrated the book and just talked about it as we would with any other sort of lunch seminar talk. So I remember that fondly.
Justine, did you have any chance to meet someone, even though we were all locked up?
It was a little tougher, I will say. Losing one of your 2 years in person makes it challenging. And I am remiss to say I'm blanking on the name of a scholar that I got to have breakfast with. But it was delightful because this is someone who works on something completely different than I did. And we actually got to approach the breakfast as like a conversation between friends, really. There wasn't even that component of me feeling like I needed to, not that it wasn't professional, but I didn't feel that I had to worry about, advancing the field over the meal, right? We were just chatting and talking and really ended up connecting over, the Yiddish language just as people, right? Not as necessarily as scholars. We weren't taking apart the nuances of verbs and that sort of thing. We really he wanted to talk to me about, people in his family who had spoken Yiddish, and I did the same. So, and again, I am remiss to say I'm panicking live to try and remember this lovely gentleman's name, but it was a delightful experience, and I wish I had gotten to have more of them last year.
And the last thing that I would want to bring up is, next to the funding that we have received and the scholars that we met, is that the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies has also given us a place to present our own work, which I also think is important to do because it gives us practice, it gives us an audience to get some feedback from, it helps us develop our thoughts more comprehensively if we can give them to an engaged audience and give a talk to them. So I remember giving a talk to a breakfast board meeting, I think, of the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies about my dissertation research, which is on coin hoards that have been found in ancient synagogues in late antiquity in Palestine. And I remember bringing little bags with coins to all the board members and handing them out and having them structure them and organize them in different groups, kind of showing what I'm doing digitally with a big database of coins so that they kind of had a little hands-on experience. But that was a really great opportunity to present your work and think about how you're going to make a PowerPoint that explains your sometimes very enigmatic topic to a general audience that's not in your field. So that was a great opportunity. So I wanted to ask you guys, have any of you also presented your work to the center, and did you get something out of it?
In regard to the board meetings, I briefly presented, but also was participating as a graduate student board member one of my years. And so, that has less to do with the content of my research and more to do with the fact that the center also provides sort of professionalization opportunities for its students that may not have to do with the specific content of your research, but I think it's important in terms of getting a window into what does it even look like to organize a Center for Jewish Studies or a center of some sort of research area at a university, who's involved, what is coming from the college, and how the finances work, what are the different factors that affect how the center is doing each year, where does funding come from. It also gives you a window into who some of the alumni are, what the relationships are like between the center and other parts of the community, nationally, maybe even internationally. So I really appreciated that opportunity too, as a graduate student.
Those are excellent transferable skills to put on your CV, that you have done these kind of administration, donors, budgeting, grant writing, whatever kind of skills that you can learn and then transfer to basically any job later on in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Justine, did you have an opportunity?
So when we were in person, I wasn't in the stage where I was ready to present, but I did take advantage of the grant writing workshops. Partly because I helped organize them and I thought, well, I should show up. But it was really, really useful, right? Not just for applying for grants from the center itself, but for my own home department as well. And it helped me create essentially the elevator pitch of what my research is, and having a soundbite that I can share, not just with other people in the field and even outside of my field, but still in the academy, but with anybody in my life, right? I was really struggling to articulate what it is that I studied until I actually sat down and had to write about it for money, which sounds a little crass, but it's such a useful skill, just as you were mentioning, that to have these skills that are going to carry us beyond our degree, no matter what it is that we end up doing. So yeah, I was deeply grateful for that. And I hope that there's a point in the next 6 months or so where I actually get to turn around and offer up my completed research. And I wasn't in that stage at that time, but the center really fostered, my ability to feel confident.
And they often invite alumni who have already graduated, right, to then come and report back on. So I'm sure that they will reach out to you.
Put me on your list.
Josh, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, so just in terms of presenting my research, I'll just echo what Justine said, that in my first year, I also had to present in a workshop format my grant application for travel funding. And there were 2 faculty members who were brought in. And that was really helpful for me in terms of thinking about how do I articulate what I'm trying to do and why it's important. So that was very important. It's not my academic work as such, but that was something where I presented my work, and that was valuable. And just very briefly, in terms of academic work, After the passing of the center's founding director, there was a conference that was put on, or a symposium, called Moments of Enlightenment in honor of Jonathan Hess. And at that symposium, I had the opportunity I not only worked as a graduate student to help organize it and gain a lot of those administrative skills that Tine and Leah were talking about, but I also had the opportunity, together with Leah and the current director of the center, Ruud van Bernhout, to present research that we worked on. And I was really grateful for that opportunity as well.
Great. Any last concluding remarks?
Just a big thank you.
I think we can all say a big thank you. None of our lives would have been as it is now if not for the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies. No matter what they provided for us, it was all very beneficial, and we hope that they will continue to impact the futures and the lives of the cohorts that come after us, and be a vital part of UNC as a institution as a whole, as a campus space for us to come together and meet each other and grow and learn.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.